The evidence box sat untouched for 23 years, collecting dust in the basement of the Pine Ridge Police Department. Detective Sarah Lawson's hands trembled as she lifted the lid, revealing the forgotten contents of case file PR 93-1429. Inside lay a single hair strand preserved in a sealed evidence bag, DNA that would finally speak for those who could no longer speak for themselves. "We got him," she whispered, staring at the DNA match on her computer screen. The name flashing back at her wasn't some drifter or known criminal. It was Detective James Harmon, badge number 347, 28-year veteran of the force, and the man who had led both original investigations. Pine Ridge, Michigan had always been the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked at night. Nestled between dense forests and crystal-clear lakes, this community of just under 15,000 prided itself on its safety record and tight-knit neighborhoods. Children rode bikes until streetlights flickered on, and the annual Harvest Festival brought everyone together each autumn like clockwork. But in 1993, and again in 1997, this facade of security shattered when two young women vanished without a trace. For decades, their families lived in agonizing limbo, while the cases gathered dust. The kind of small-town tragedy that eventually fades from headlines, but never from memory. No one suspected the predator wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was standing in plain sight, wearing a badge, attending the town meetings about the disappearances, and comforting the grieving families. The very man tasked with finding the missing women was the reason they would never come home. This isn't just another cold case story. This is about how the ultimate betrayal of trust ripped through an entire community and changed it forever. How evil can wear a uniform and hide behind authority. And how justice, though delayed, finally arrived in Pine Ridge. Before we dive deeper into this shocking case, take a second to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next in this twisted tale of betrayal. Rellin Weber was a creature of habit. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., the 24-year-old kindergarten teacher would lace up her blue Asics running shoes, clip her house key to her shoelace, and set out for a 4-mile run through the winding trails of Oakwood Park. Her roommate, Tanya Nichols, often joked that you could set your watch by Rellin's routine. "She was the most disciplined person I knew," Tanya would later tell investigators. Rain or shine, that girl was out running before the sun came up, said it cleared her head for the day. Rellin had moved to Pine Ridge 3 years earlier, after graduating from Michigan State with a degree in early childhood education. With her warm smile and patient demeanor, she quickly became a favorite at Pine Ridge Elementary. Parents requested her class for their children, and her principal had already marked her for advancement despite her young age. "The kids adored her," said Principal Margaret Donovan in her police statement. "She had this way of making each child feel special. She'd remember their birthdays, their pets' names, what made them scared, what made them laugh. That's not something you can teach." Outside the classroom, Rellin volunteered at the local animal shelter on weekends and sang in the community choir. Her father, retired Army Colonel David Weber, described his daughter as the kind of person who made the world better just by being in it. Her mother, Karen, a nurse at Pine Ridge Memorial, kept a scrapbook of the handmade cards Rellin's students gave her each year. On Wednesday, October 13, 1993, Rellin's alarm went off at 5:15 a.m. as usual. According to Tanya, who was awake with a cold that morning, Rellin grabbed a banana from the kitchen counter, filled her water bottle, and headed out the door with a casual, "See you at dinner." The last words anyone who loved her would ever hear her speak. When Rellin didn't return home by 7 a.m. to get ready for work, Tanya wasn't immediately concerned. Perhaps she'd extended her run or stopped to chat with another early riser. But when the elementary school called at 8:45 a.m. asking about Rellin's absence, alarm bells started ringing. Rellin had never missed a day of work without calling in. By 9:30 a.m., Tanya had called the police. By noon, 20 officers were combing Oakwood Park and the surrounding neighborhoods. By nightfall, over 200 volunteers had joined the search, calling Rellin's name into the increasingly dark woods as hope dimmed with the fading light. 3 days into the search, a jogger found Rellin's blue Asics running shoe with the house key still attached, half buried in mud about 2 miles into her usual route. Nearby, investigators discovered drag marks leading from the trail to a service road, evidence that would later prove crucial in understanding what happened that foggy October morning. The community rallied around the Weber family. The local printing shop produced thousands of missing person flyers with Rellin's smiling face. Volunteers organized search parties that combed every inch of woodland within a 20-mile radius. Local businesses donated food and supplies to the search teams. The Pine Ridge Gazette ran daily updates on the case, keeping Rellin's disappearance front and center in everyone's minds. Detective James Harmon, then a rising star in the department with 8 years on the force, took lead on the case. "We're pursuing every possible angle," he told reporters at a press conference 2 weeks after Rellin vanished. "We won't rest until we bring Rellin home to her family." But as weeks turned to months, the trail went cold. No body was found. No witnesses came forward. The case that had consumed the town slowly faded from daily conversation, though the Weber family continued their tireless advocacy. They established a scholarship in Rellin's name at the elementary school and held a candlelight vigil on the anniversary of her disappearance each year. 4 years passed. The wound in Pine Ridge's collective psyche had scarred over, though it had never fully healed. Then, on September 27, 1997, it was violently reopened when 26-year-old Jennifer Martinez vanished during the town's annual Harvest Festival. Jennifer, a registered nurse at Pine Ridge Memorial Hospital, had moved to town just 18 months earlier. The daughter of Mexican immigrants who had settled in Detroit, Jennifer was the first in her family to graduate college. Her mother, Elena, described her as ambitious but kind-hearted, someone who worked hard but always made time for others. Unlike Rellin, Jennifer was outgoing and spontaneous. Her apartment was often the gathering place for impromptu dinner parties, and she'd become known for bringing homemade tamales to hospital potlucks. She'd recently started dating Mark Simmons, a paramedic she'd met through work, and according to friends, was happier than she'd ever been. The Harvest Festival was Pine Ridge's biggest annual event, a weekend of carnival rides, craft booths, live music, and the famous apple pie contest that had been featured in Midwest Living magazine. Jennifer had volunteered to work the first aid tent on Saturday morning but planned to enjoy the festival with Mark and some friends that evening. Security camera footage from First National Bank, located at the edge of the festival grounds, captured Jennifer walking alone at 8:47 p.m. She appeared to be texting on her flip phone, likely messaging Mark, who had been delayed at work. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Jennifer Martinez. When she failed to meet her friends at the Ferris wheel at 9:00 p.m. as planned, they assumed she was still with Mark. When Mark arrived at 9:30 p.m. and couldn't find her, the group split up to search the crowded fairgrounds. By 11:00 p.m., with the festival winding down and still no sign of Jennifer, Mark reported her missing to the police officers stationed at the event. The timing couldn't have been worse for an effective search. With thousands of visitors from neighboring towns packing the streets and fairgrounds, potential evidence was being trampled by the minute. The festival's temporary lighting created shadows and blind spots throughout the normally quiet town center. And with so many unfamiliar faces in the crowd, witnesses couldn't distinguish between regular attendees and potential suspects. Once again, Detective James Harmon took charge of the investigation. Now a lieutenant with an impressive solve rate for violent crimes, Harmon organized a methodical grid search of the festival grounds and surrounding areas. Jennifer's photo was distributed to all officers and security personnel, and announcements were made over the festival's PA system. By morning, Jennifer's disappearance dominated local news. The festival's final day was canceled as the search intensified. Volunteers gathered at the community center, where Harmon briefed them before deploying search teams throughout the town. 3 days after Jennifer vanished, a festival cleanup crew found her purse in a dumpster behind the high school gymnasium, which had been used as an overflow parking area. Inside was her wallet with ID and credit cards intact, but her phone was missing. More disturbing was the discovery of her silver medical alert bracelet, something friends insisted she would never willingly remove due to her severe penicillin allergy. As the investigation into Jennifer's disappearance progressed, the similarities to Rellin's case became impossible to ignore. Both women were in their mid-20s. Both had disappeared while alone. Both cases lacked witnesses despite occurring in relatively public settings. And both women were described by those who knew them as responsible and predictable, not the type to vanish voluntarily. Yet there were notable differences too. Rellin had disappeared in the early morning hours on a secluded trail, while Jennifer vanished from a crowded public event. Rellin was a longtime resident with deep community ties, while Jennifer was relatively new to town. Rellin's disappearance had left behind a single piece of physical evidence, her running shoe, while Jennifer's case offered more: the purse, bracelet, and security footage. What investigators didn't know then, but would discover years later, was that both women had one crucial connection. They had each interacted with Detective James Harmon in the weeks before their disappearances. Rellin had filed a report about a suspicious vehicle near the elementary school. Jennifer had interviewed Harmon for a community health assessment she was conducting for the hospital. These seemingly innocent professional contacts would later prove to be anything but coincidental. So, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories reach, and how crime affects communities everywhere, from small towns like Pine Ridge to major cities across the world. Your perspective matters to this community we're building together. When Rellin Weber disappeared in October 1993, the Pine Ridge Police Department had never handled a missing persons case of this magnitude. With a force of just 28 officers serving a population of 15,000, they were better equipped for handling drunk driving incidents and petty theft than a potential abduction. Chief Walter Grayson, a 30-year veteran nearing retirement, immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. "This isn't just another missing person," he told his officers during the initial briefing. "This is one of our own. Everyone drops what they're doing. Finding Rellin is our only priority." Within hours of Tanya Nichols reporting her roommate missing, the department mobilized every available officer. They established a command center at the station, set up a tip line, and coordinated with the Michigan State Police to bring in additional resources, including tracking dogs and a helicopter equipped with thermal imaging. By contrast, when Jennifer Martinez vanished 4 years later, the department's response was swift and practiced, almost as if they'd been waiting for this moment. Within 30 minutes of Mark Simmons reporting Jennifer missing from the Harvest Festival, officers had secured the perimeter of the fairgrounds and begun questioning vendors and attendees. By dawn, the FBI had been notified, and agents from the Detroit field office were en route to Pine Ridge. "We learned from Rellin's case," Lieutenant James Harmon told reporters at the time. "We know that the first 48 hours are critical. We're not making the same mistakes twice." What no one knew then was that Harmon's efficiency wasn't born from professional diligence alone. As the man responsible for both women's disappearances, he was orchestrating investigations designed to fail from the inside. The 1993 investigation into Rellin Weber's disappearance was led by then-Detective James Harmon, with assistance from Detective Frank Morales and State Police Investigator Diana Chen. Each brought a different approach to the case. Harmon, at 32, was considered the department's rising star. With a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and specialized training in interview techniques, he was often the one who could get reluctant witnesses to open up. His approach to Rellin's case was methodical and by the book. He insisted on personally interviewing each of Rellin's close contacts and spent hours studying maps of her running route. James was obsessive about the details, Frank Morales would later recall. He'd stay late reviewing statements looking for inconsistencies. "I thought it was dedication. Now I wonder if he was making sure we didn't get too close to the truth." Morales, a former military police officer, focused on the physical evidence. He coordinated the search teams and forensic analysis of the recovered running shoe. His systematic approach contrasted with Harmon's more intuitive style, creating what seemed at the time to be a complementary partnership. Investigator Chen, brought in from the state police, specialized in missing persons cases. She created a detailed victimology profile of Rellin, examining every aspect of her life for potential threats or conflicts. Chen was the first to suggest that Rellin's abduction might not have been random, that the perpetrator likely knew her routine and had planned the crime. By 1997, when Jennifer Martinez disappeared, the investigative team had evolved. Harmon had been promoted to lieutenant and still took lead on major cases. Morales had transferred to a neighboring jurisdiction, and Chen had moved to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. In their place were Detective Sandra Wilson, a former sex crimes investigator from Detroit, and Detective Paul Novak, a recent transfer with a background in digital forensics. Wilson approached Jennifer's case with a focus on potential sexual motivation, a perspective that Harmon subtly discouraged. "He kept steering us away from that angle," Wilson would testify years later. "He insisted it was more likely a random opportunity crime or possibly related to something at the hospital." Novak's contribution proved crucial, though its significance wouldn't be understood until years later. He secured and analyzed the security footage showing Jennifer's last known movements and was the first to notice a partial reflection in a storefront window, a reflection that captured a police uniform in the background, just feet from where Jennifer was walking. When Novak pointed this out, Harmon quickly assigned him to follow up on tips coming into the hotline, effectively removing him from the video analysis. The footage was subsequently corrupted during transfer to the state crime lab, a technical failure that would later be revealed as deliberate sabotage. In Rellin's case, physical evidence was scarce. The recovered running shoe showed signs of a struggle. The laces were broken, and soil samples embedded in the treads didn't match the trail where it was found. Forensic analysis revealed a partial fingerprint on the plastic toggle of the shoe's laces. But in 1993, the print wasn't clear enough for identification. Investigators collected DNA samples from several men in Rellin's life: her ex-boyfriend from college, a maintenance worker at her apartment complex who had asked her out, and even the father of one of her kindergarten students who had been unusually interested in her. All were eventually cleared. The most promising lead came from a paper delivery boy who reported seeing a dark-colored SUV parked on the service road near Oakwood Park around 5:45 a.m. on the day Rellin vanished. The vehicle wasn't there on his route the previous day. Unfortunately, the 12-year-old couldn't recall the make or model, only that it had a dent in the passenger door. Harmon claimed to have followed up on every registered SUV in a 50-mile radius, but departmental records would later show that several vehicles were never checked, including his own dark green Ford Explorer. In Jennifer's case, the evidence was more substantial, but still insufficient for an arrest. Her purse and medical alert bracelet provided touch DNA that was preserved but yielded no matches in the system. The security footage, before its convenient corruption, showed Jennifer walking alone but revealed no obvious signs of distress or pursuit. The investigation focused heavily on Mark Simmons, Jennifer's boyfriend, despite his airtight alibi of being at work during her disappearance. Harmon personally conducted 6 separate interviews with Simmons, each more aggressive than the last, creating tension within the investigative team. It was like he needed a suspect, and Mark was convenient, Detective Wilson noted in her case diary. Even when the evidence pointed elsewhere, Harmon kept circling back to him. Other leads included a carnival worker with a history of sexual assault who had left town immediately after the festival, and a patient from the hospital who had made inappropriate comments to Jennifer. Both were eventually located and eliminated as suspects. The disappearance of Rellin Weber shocked Pine Ridge to its core. The local newspaper, the Pine Ridge Gazette, ran front-page coverage for weeks. Candlelight vigils drew hundreds of community members. When the 1-month mark passed with no resolution, regional television stations picked up the story. "Teacher vanishes without a trace," read the headline in the Detroit Free Press, bringing statewide attention to the case. A segment on Michigan's Most Wanted generated dozens of tips, none of which panned out. As months passed, media interest inevitably waned. By the 1-year anniversary, coverage had dwindled to occasional "case remains unsolved" updates. The Weber family appeared on several true crime shows, keeping Rellin's story alive but generating no new leads. Jennifer Martinez's disappearance in 1997 reignited interest in both cases. The similarities were too striking to ignore, and the media quickly connected the dots that law enforcement publicly downplayed. Second young woman vanishes from small Michigan town, blared national headlines. CNN sent a correspondent to cover the story. The case attracted attention from Hispanic media outlets due to Jennifer's background, bringing bilingual coverage and additional pressure on local authorities. The community's response was a mix of fear and determination. Parents stopped allowing children to play unsupervised. Women began traveling in groups. Gun and pepper spray sales soared. Meanwhile, volunteers continued searching long after official efforts scaled back. Despite the initial intensity of both investigations, several factors contributed to their eventual stagnation. The most obvious was the lack of physical evidence. In Rellin's case, the running shoe provided limited forensic value. In Jennifer's case, the purse and bracelet offered touch DNA but no matches in any database. False leads consumed valuable resources and investigative energy. A prison inmate in Indiana claimed to know where Rellin was buried, prompting a 3-day excavation of an abandoned farm that yielded nothing. A psychic's vision led search teams to drag a lake for Jennifer, another fruitless effort. Perhaps most significantly, other cases demanded attention. 6 months after Rellin's disappearance, a double homicide at a gas station on the edge of town diverted resources. Following Jennifer's case, a series of armed robberies targeting elderly residents became the department's focus. But the true reason both investigations failed to progress was far more sinister. The lead investigator was actively sabotaging them. Harmon strategically misdirected resources, lost key evidence, and intimidated witnesses whose observations might have pointed to him. Looking back, it's so obvious, Detective Wilson would later testify. He volunteered for every weekend shift during the Martinez investigation, saying he wanted to stay close to the case. But he was really making sure no one else could access the evidence without him knowing. As the cases grew colder, the families of both women refused to give up hope. David and Karen Weber established a scholarship in their daughter's name and appeared at the police station on the 13th of every month, asking for updates. Elena Martinez moved from Detroit to Pine Ridge, taking a job at the same hospital where her daughter had worked, determined to keep pressure on local authorities. What do you think happened to Rellin and Jennifer? Was there a connection between their cases that investigators missed? Drop your theories in the comments below. Sometimes fresh perspectives can shed new light on cold cases, and I'm curious to hear what you're thinking as this story unfolds, the impact on families and the community. As months turned to years with no resolution, the disappearances of Rellin Weber and Jennifer Martinez cast long shadows over Pine Ridge. What began as acute grief gradually transformed into a persistent, dull ache that permeated the town's collective consciousness. For the Weber family, the absence of closure proved almost as devastating as the loss itself. It's the not knowing that haunts you, David Weber confessed during a rare interview on the 5th anniversary of his daughter's disappearance. You can't properly mourn someone when there's still that sliver of hope they might walk through the door someday. Karen Weber channeled her grief into action, establishing the Rellin Weber Foundation, which provided safety education for young women and resources for families of missing persons. She became certified in search and rescue techniques and volunteered with teams across Michigan. If I can spare another family this pain, then Rellin's legacy lives on, she often said. Elena Martinez, who spoke limited English when her daughter vanished, became fluent out of necessity, to advocate for Jennifer, to communicate with police, and to ensure her daughter's case wasn't forgotten because of language barriers. She moved into Jennifer's apartment, sleeping on the couch rather than the bed, keeping everything exactly as Jennifer had left it. I feel closer to her here, Elena explained to a documentary crew that visited in 2001. Sometimes I imagine she just stepped out for a moment and will be back any minute. Mark Simmons, Jennifer's boyfriend, struggled with unwarranted suspicion from some community members despite being cleared by police. He eventually left Pine Ridge in 2000, unable to bear the whispers and sideways glances. I lost Jennifer and then I lost my home, he wrote in a letter to Elena. But I'll never stop looking for answers. For the broader community, The unresolved cases created a fundamental shift in how residents viewed their town and each other. Pine Ridge had always prided itself on being the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors and looked out for one another. Now, that same closeness bred suspicion. If the perpetrator wasn't an outsider, then he must be one of them, someone they passed on the street, sat next to in church, or chatted with at the grocery store. Parents no longer allowed children to walk to school alone. The once popular jogging trails in Oakwood Park saw dramatically decreased use, especially by women. The annual Harvest Festival continued, but with significantly enhanced security measures and lower attendance. A town that had once left doors unlocked now led the county in home security system installations. Every October 13th, on the anniversary of Rellin's disappearance, the community gathered at Oakwood Park for a candlelight vigil. What began as a massive outpouring of support with hundreds of attendees gradually dwindled to a core group of about 50 dedicated individuals by the 10-year mark. Still, the tradition continued, a flickering reminder that Rellin had not been forgotten. Similarly, each September 27th, a vigil for Jennifer took place at the town square where the Harvest Festival was held. Jennifer Martinez always spoke, her English improving each year, her determination never wavering. The search efforts evolved over time. Large-scale ground searches gave way to more targeted approaches based on new technologies or theories. When ground-penetrating radar became more accessible in the early 2000s, volunteers scanned areas of interest identified by retired Detective Frank Morales, who continued working the cases unofficially after leaving the force. In 2005, a group of university students studying forensic anthropology spent their spring break searching remote areas of the county, using new mapping software to identify potential burial sites based on accessibility from roads and soil composition. Though they found nothing related to the cases, their efforts brought renewed media attention. Both families developed different coping mechanisms for living with unresolved grief. The Webers chose to celebrate Rellin's life, rather than dwell on her disappearance. They hosted an annual barbecue on her birthday, inviting her former students, colleagues, and friends to share stories and memories. They established traditions like releasing butterflies, Rellin's favorite insect, and planting a new tree in their yard each year she remained missing. Jennifer Martinez took a more solitary approach to her grief. She kept a daily journal addressed to Jennifer, detailing her ongoing search and the small moments of life her daughter was missing. "I don't want her to feel like she missed anything," Elena explained. "When we find her, not if, but when, I want her to know every day was spent looking for her." Both families refused to hold memorial services, explicitly rejecting anything that suggested they had given up hope. They spoke of their daughters in the present tense. They kept their phone numbers unchanged in case their girls tried to call home. They left porch lights on every night, beacons guiding their children back to them. By the mid-2000s, Pine Ridge had developed a dual identity. To visitors, it remained a charming small town with excellent schools and low overall crime rates. To residents, it was a community living under the weight of unresolved trauma, a place where two young women had vanished without explanation, and where the person responsible still walked free. The police department, once viewed with universal respect, now faced subtle skepticism. Residents complied with officers but questioned their effectiveness. The annual town budget increasingly allocated funds to private security initiatives rather than trusting solely in law enforcement. What time is it where you're watching from? Drop it in the comments below. It's fascinating to think about how this story is reaching people across different time zones, with some of you watching in broad daylight and others deep into the night. No matter when you're tuning in, thank you for being part of this journey as we uncover the truth behind these haunting disappearances. What changed after years of inactivity? For nearly 2 decades, the cases of Rellin Weber and Jennifer Martinez sat in the Pine Ridge Police Department's cold case files, not forgotten, but not actively pursued. The original investigators had retired or moved on. The families continued their advocacy, but with diminishing public response. The town had reluctantly accepted that these mysteries might never be solved. Then, in 2016, 3 significant developments converged to breathe new life into the dormant investigations. First, Pine Ridge received a federal grant specifically for reopening cold cases. The funds allowed for dedicated personnel and advanced forensic testing that had previously been too expensive for the small department's budget. Second, Michigan established a specialized cold case task force that partnered state resources with local departments. This brought fresh eyes and standardized methodologies to investigations that had stalled. Third, and perhaps most crucially, Detective Sarah Lawson transferred to Pine Ridge from the Detroit Police Department. A 15-year veteran with a reputation for solving seemingly unsolvable cases, Lawson had personal reasons for requesting the assignment. Her cousin had been Rellin Weber's college roommate. "I grew up hearing about Rellin," Lawson would later explain. "Her case was part of why I became a detective. When the opportunity came to work where she disappeared, it felt like fate." Chief Michael Donovan, who had replaced the retired Walter Grayson in 2010, initially hesitated to reopen wounds that had barely scarred over. "These cases broke this town once," he told Lawson during her interview. "Are you sure you want to risk doing that again?" Her response was simple. What broke this town wasn't investigating these cases. It was never solving them. The scientific advances since the original investigations were substantial. DNA testing had become exponentially more sensitive, requiring smaller samples and yielding more detailed results. Digital forensics could now recover data from devices and media that were previously considered unreadable. And the national DNA database had expanded dramatically, increasing the chances of finding matches to unknown samples. Lawson's first step was to catalog every piece of physical evidence from both cases and determine what could benefit from retesting. The results were immediately promising. The partial fingerprint from Rellin's running shoe toggle, deemed insufficient for identification in 1993, was now clear enough for analysis using enhanced imaging techniques. The touch DNA from Jennifer's purse and medical alert bracelet, preserved but never matched, could now be tested using methods that required far less genetic material. Most significantly, advances in familial DNA matching meant that even if the perpetrator wasn't in the system, a biological relative might be, providing a path to identification that hadn't existed during the original investigations. But technology alone wasn't enough. Lawson also brought a fresh investigative approach, one that questioned every assumption made by the original team. She created new timelines, re-interviewed surviving witnesses, and mapped both cases using geographic profiling software that hadn't existed in the 1990s. "I'm not looking for new evidence," she explained to her team. "I'm looking at the old evidence in new ways." The cold case detective who refused to give up. Sarah Lawson's colleagues described her as relentlessly methodical. She worked 16-hour days, converting a storage room at the station into a dedicated space for the Weber and Martinez cases. The walls were covered with photos, maps, and timelines. Filing cabinets contained meticulously organized copies of every report, statement, and piece of correspondence related to both investigations. Lawson's approach differed from her predecessors in one crucial aspect. She began by assuming the cases were connected, rather than trying to prove a connection later. This perspective shift led her to focus on overlaps between the victims' lives that might have been overlooked. "Everyone focused on the similarities in how these women disappeared," she noted in her case diary. "I'm more interested in the similarities in how they lived." This approach led Lawson to create comprehensive charts of everyone both women had interacted with in the months before their disappearances. She cross-referenced medical records, bank statements, phone logs, and community event attendance to identify points of intersection. The list of people who had meaningful contact with both women was surprisingly short, and at the top was Lieutenant James Harmon, by then retired, and living just outside Pine Ridge. Initially, this didn't raise red flags. As the lead investigator on both cases, Harmon had naturally interviewed friends, family, and colleagues of both victims. His name appearing in both files was expected. What caught Lawson's attention was the timing. In reviewing Rellin's school records, she discovered that Harmon had interviewed Rellin just 3 weeks before her disappearance about a suspicious vehicle near the elementary school. Similarly, Hospital records showed that Jennifer had interviewed Harmon for a community health assessment just 10 days before she vanished. These interactions hadn't been highlighted in either case file, a curious omission from an otherwise meticulous investigator. As Lawson dug deeper into Harmon's involvement, she encountered unexpected resistance. Former colleagues defended him vigorously. Records of his work schedules during key time frames were mysteriously missing, and when she requested access to evidence that should have been readily available, she was told it had been misplaced during a storage room reorganization. Rather than deterring her, these obstacles only strengthened Lawson's resolve. "Resistance isn't random," she told Chief Donovan. "It clusters around sensitive areas, like a pain response when you press on a wound." The breakthrough came from an unlikely source: the corrupted security footage from the Harvest Festival. While the original video file had been damaged beyond recovery, Lawson discovered that a backup had been automatically saved to the department's server, a standard procedure that Harmon, despite his technical savvy, had overlooked. Digital forensics specialist Amir Patel spent weeks restoring the footage. Frame by frame, he reconstructed the critical moments showing Jennifer Martinez's last known movements. And there, in the reflection of a storefront window that Detective Novak had noticed years earlier, was clear confirmation: a police uniform. But not just any officer. The distinctive posture and build matched James Harmon perfectly. He was following her, Lawson realized. Not as an investigator would follow a lead, but as a predator follows prey. This discovery prompted a search warrant for Harmon's original case notes, not the official reports filed with the department, but his personal notebooks. Hidden in his attic, these journals revealed a disturbing obsession with both victims, documented under the guise of professional interest. The most damning evidence came from the DNA analysis of Rellin's running shoe. The partial fingerprint, now enhanced through new technology, matched Harmon's right index finger, a print that should never have been on the evidence if he had handled it properly with gloves as protocol required. More disturbing still was the hair strand found in the evidence box, a strand that didn't belong to Rellin. When compared against the DNA database, it returned a familial match to a Harmon relative who had been convicted of drug possession in 2012. Subsequent testing confirmed it belonged to James Harmon himself. He collected trophies, Lawson theorized. But he made a mistake. He contaminated the evidence with his own DNA, then couldn't destroy it without raising suspicion. So he buried it in the evidence room, counting on departmental disorganization to keep it hidden. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation team and, soon after, the entire department. James Harmon, decorated officer, trusted colleague, pillar of the community, was not just a failed investigator. He was a predator who had used his badge to hunt, his authority to access victims, and his position to cover his tracks. On a rainy Tuesday morning in April 2017, Sarah Lawson presented her findings to Chief Donovan and County Prosecutor Michelle Kwan. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Harmon had known both victims, had opportunity and access, had deliberately misdirected both investigations, and had left DNA evidence linking him to at least one crime scene. "We need more before we move on him," Kwan cautioned. "If we're wrong about this, if we accuse a retired cop without ironclad evidence, the backlash will be severe." Lawson pushed back. "If we're right and we wait, he might destroy evidence we haven't found yet. Or worse, there could be other victims we don't know about." The compromise was a surveillance operation. Harmon, now 56 and working as a security consultant, was placed under 24-hour watch. His phones were tapped, his internet activity monitored, his movements tracked. The final piece fell into place when Harmon, perhaps sensing the net closing around him, attempted to access the evidence room at the police station using his retired officer's credentials. The after-hours visit triggered silent alarms, and officers found him attempting to remove items from the Weber and Martinez evidence boxes. Confronted with the surveillance footage, DNA evidence, and his unauthorized evidence room visit, Harmon's carefully constructed facade crumbled. In exchange for prosecutors taking the death penalty off the table, he confessed to both murders and led investigators to the remote hunting cabin where he had concealed the remains of both women. If you found this story impactful, please share this video to help raise awareness about other cold cases still waiting to be solved. Every share could reach someone with information that breaks another case wide open. The power of community can bring justice to victims who've waited far too long for answers. James Harmon grew up in Pine Ridge, the son of the town's most respected doctor and a high school English teacher. By all accounts, his childhood was privileged and stable. He was a star athlete, class president, and Eagle Scout, the embodiment of the all-American success story. After graduating from the University of Michigan with a criminal justice degree, he returned to his hometown in 1985, joining the police force at age 24. He was exactly what we wanted in an officer, recalled retired Chief Walter Grayson. Smart, physically capable, and he knew the community. Plus, he had that natural charisma that made people trust him immediately. What no one saw beneath Harmon's polished exterior was a calculating predator with narcissistic tendencies. Psychological evaluations conducted after his arrest revealed a man who viewed himself as intellectually superior to his colleagues and untouchable by the law he was sworn to uphold. Dr. Vanessa Torres, the forensic psychologist who assessed Harmon, noted, "He displays classic traits of a psychopath: superficial charm, grandiose self-worth, pathological lying, and a complete lack of remorse. What made him particularly dangerous was his ability to compartmentalize. He could commit these horrific acts and then return to being the respected detective without any apparent psychological distress." By 1993, when Rellin Weber disappeared, Harmon had risen to detective after 8 years on the force. His solve rate for property crimes was impressive, and he had recently completed specialized training in interview techniques and evidence collection at Quantico, training that would later help him manipulate investigations and contaminate evidence without raising suspicion. When Jennifer Martinez vanished in 1997, Harmon had been promoted to lieutenant, overseeing the detective division. This position gave him unprecedented control over both investigations, assigning personnel, determining which leads to pursue, and most critically, access to all evidence. He created a system where everything flowed through him, explained Detective Sarah Lawson. Reports, witness statements, evidence logs, nothing moved forward without his approval. It was the perfect setup for someone who needed to control the narrative. Harmon's standing in Pine Ridge extended far beyond his professional role. He coached Little League Baseball for 15 years. He served on the school board. He organized the annual police charity drive for children's cancer research. His marriage to Rebecca Taylor, daughter of a prominent local judge, further cemented his status among the town's elite. "Jim was everywhere," said former Mayor Harold Wilson. "Any community event, any fundraiser, any crisis, he was always the first to volunteer, the first to help. When my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer, he organized meals for our family for months. That's the kind of man we thought he was." This carefully cultivated public image served a dual purpose. It provided Harmon with a protective shield of goodwill that made him above suspicion, and it gave him access to potential victims. As the town's most trusted officer, women felt safe approaching him with concerns, sharing personal information and being alone with him. Trust he exploited with devastating consequences. Harmon's role as lead investigator on both cases allowed him to control every aspect of the investigations. He conducted key interviews personally, often without recording them or with recordings that later proved to be selectively edited. He volunteered for evidence collection duties, giving him opportunities to contaminate or remove crucial items. He directed search efforts away from areas where evidence might be found. Most insidiously, he used his position to plant false leads and create diversions. In Rellin's case, he fabricated a witness statement about a suspicious van seen near the park. In Jennifer's case, he focused intense scrutiny on her boyfriend, Mark Simmons, despite clear evidence of his innocence. "Looking back at his case notes now, it's obvious," said Frank Morales, who worked alongside Harmon. "Every time we got close to something significant, he'd suddenly discover a new lead that sent us in the opposite direction. We wasted weeks chasing ghosts while the real evidence grew cold." The forensic breakthroughs in the case came from 3 key sources. First, The enhanced fingerprint analysis of Rellin's shoe toggle revealed a match to Harmon's right index finger, a print that should never have been there if he had followed proper evidence handling protocols. Second, the hair strand found in the evidence box, when subjected to mitochondrial DNA analysis, matched Harmon's maternal lineage. Further testing confirmed it was his own hair, likely transferred when he handled the evidence without proper precautions. Third, the restored security footage from the Harvest Festival clearly showed Harmon following Jennifer Martinez through the crowd, contradicting his official statement that he had been monitoring the festival entrance during that time period. Beyond the forensic evidence, witness testimonies that had been previously overlooked or deliberately buried now painted a damning picture. A parking attendant at the elementary school where Rellin worked remembered seeing Harmon's distinctive green Ford Explorer parked there several times in the weeks before her disappearance. Visits that were never documented in any official capacity. A nurse who worked with Jennifer Martinez recalled seeing her visibly uncomfortable after Harmon insisted on conducting her community health interview in his car rather than at the hospital as originally planned. The nurse had reported this to her supervisor, but the information never made it into the official investigation. Despite his careful planning and years of successfully covering his tracks, Harmon made several critical errors that eventually led to his downfall. His first mistake was keeping trophies. In the search of his home following his arrest, investigators discovered a locked box containing Rellin's house key, which had been attached to her running shoe, and Jennifer's cell phone, items that should have been entered into evidence but were never documented. His second mistake was his compulsive need to stay involved with the cases long after they had gone cold. He regularly accessed the evidence room to review materials, creating a pattern that Sarah Lawson noticed when examining the sign-in logs. His third and most damning mistake was his failure to understand how technology would eventually catch up to his crimes. The DNA he left behind, the fingerprint he couldn't see, the backup video file he didn't know existed, all preserved evidence of his guilt that waited patiently for science to advance enough to reveal it. Harmon thought he was smarter than everyone, Lawson observed. But no matter how clever a criminal thinks they are, they always leave something behind. Science just needed to catch up to what the evidence was telling us all along. What's the weather like where you are today? Drop a comment below and let us know. It's fascinating to think that as we all process this disturbing story of betrayal from the comfort of our homes, we're experiencing completely different environments. Some of you might be watching in sunshine, others during a storm. Our shared humanity connects us despite these differences, just as our collective desire for justice connected the people who never gave up on finding the truth in Pine Ridge. On May 3, 2017, the unthinkable happened in Pine Ridge, Michigan. James Harmon, decorated officer, community leader, and trusted friend to many, was arrested at his lakeside home just outside town limits. The charges: 2 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of Rellin Weber and Jennifer Martinez. News cameras captured the surreal scene as Harmon, now 56 with graying hair and reading glasses, was led from his front door in handcuffs. He walked with the same confident posture he'd maintained throughout his career, but his eyes, darting, panicked, betrayed the facade. This wasn't a man being wrongfully accused. This was a predator finally cornered after decades of hunting freely. The community's reaction was nothing short of seismic. Schools closed early. Impromptu gatherings formed in church parking lots and coffee shops as residents tried to process the betrayal. Many wept openly. Some expressed anger at being deceived for so long. Others struggled with guilt, wondering if they had missed signs that might have saved the victims. "We invited him into our homes," said Margaret Donovan, Rellin's former principal. "We trusted him with our safety, our children, our most vulnerable moments. And all that time he was the very danger we feared." For the Weber and Martinez families, the arrest brought a complex mixture of emotions. There was the relief of finally knowing the truth, the grief of having their worst fears confirmed, and the rage of realizing their suffering had been prolonged by the very person who promised to help them. At a press conference following Harmon's arraignment, David Weber spoke with quiet dignity. "For 24 years we've lived in limbo, not knowing if our daughter was alive or dead, if she was suffering, if she might someday find her way home. James Harmon stole not only Rellin's life, but also decades of peace from our family. There is no punishment severe enough for that kind of evil. Elena Martinez, who had learned English during her years of advocacy for her daughter, declined a translator. "I wanted Jennifer to hear my voice clearly when I spoke about her," she explained. "Today I want Harmon to hear me clearly too. You did not win. You did not silence her story. Justice may have been delayed, but it has finally arrived." The trial lasted 3 weeks in October 2018. Prosecutors presented the forensic evidence, the fingerprint, the DNA, the restored security footage, alongside testimony from former colleagues who detailed Harmon's suspicious behavior during the original investigations. The defense attempted to argue evidence contamination and departmental incompetence, but the jury was unconvinced. After just 6 hours of deliberation, they returned a guilty verdict on all counts. Judge Samantha Reeves sentenced Harmon to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. As he was led from the courtroom, Harmon maintained the same stoic expression he'd worn throughout the trial, a final performance from a man who had spent his life hiding his true nature behind a carefully constructed mask. The case sent ripples through law enforcement agencies nationwide. The FBI developed new protocols for handling cold cases, including mandatory review by agents not connected to the original investigation. Police departments across the country implemented stricter evidence handling procedures and regular audits of evidence rooms. Many jurisdictions established civilian oversight committees specifically for missing persons cases. In Michigan, legislators passed the Weber-Martinez Act, requiring all law enforcement officers to submit DNA samples for exclusionary purposes, and mandating that no single detective could lead a major investigation without partner oversight. The act also created a dedicated fund for applying new forensic technologies to cold cases. For Pine Ridge, the healing process has been slow but steady. The town no longer defines itself by the tragedies that occurred there, but by the resilience shown in their aftermath. A memorial garden now stands at the entrance to Oakwood Park, featuring 2 cherry trees that bloom each spring, a reminder that even after the darkest winter, renewal is possible. If this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button for more in-depth true crime investigations. Every subscription helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. And leave a comment below with cases you'd like to see covered in future videos. Your suggestions often lead us to stories that deserve attention, but haven't received it. Together we can ensure that victims are remembered and justice, however delayed, is ultimately served.